In today's episode of Tool Demos, we'll be doing a transmission service on this Ford transmission. Specifically, it's a 4R70W transmission, and we're going to start by showing you how you can identify which transmission you have in your Ford vehicle. We're going to open up the driver's door and look on the inside of it. You've got this VIN tag here. Also at the bottom of that VIN tag, we've got vehicle information, and right there you've got TR, and U is the code for 4R70W. So that's the transmission we have, and these are the specs that I'll give you. So before you get started on your project, you should know that Ford has been using this transmission in all sorts of vehicles throughout many model years, but there's a cutoff year, which is 2008. In 2008, Ford started using Mercon LV as the factory fill in all their transmissions. LV is low viscosity, and this is what you want to use exclusively if your vehicle is 2008 or newer. Today I'm working on a 2005 Lincoln Town Car, so I'm going to be filling the transmission with Mercon V transmission fluid. And Mercon V and Mercon LV are not compatible. You should never put V in a newer vehicle, and you should never put LV in an older vehicle. So remember, 2008 is the cutoff for that. All right, let's start now by removing the fluid from the transmission. Now this transmission doesn't have a drain plug, so you have two choices on getting that fluid out. The first is the messiest, but it doesn't require any special tools. You just unbolt the pan, let that fluid spill out, hopefully you catch it all. The second method is evacuating the fluid from the top using an evacuator like this. And I'm going to take this tube, put it down into the dipstick tube, and pull all of that fluid out and into that container just by using the power of air. Now I did a review of this tool. You can click here to see that review, or you can just watch to see how it's done on this vehicle. Okay, way back here, passenger side behind the engine, if you can see that yellow handle, that's the fluid dipstick. We're going to pull that out and we can put our evacuator in there. So this is the largest diameter tube that comes with the kit. It's also the largest diameter that will fit in that transmission dipstick tube. So I'm just going to put that pointy end down in the tube. I'm going to carefully push it down in. It's going to have to curve around some of the bends that are in there. Just keep pushing, but when you hit the bottom of that pan, stop, because if you don't, that tube could curl back up and you won't get all of that fluid out. All right, that feels like the bottom. I'm just gonna pull it up and back down again. Yeah, that's definitely hitting the bottom there. So I just heard the tone change on that Venturi. It sounds like it's working a lot harder than it was. So that gives me a clue that the chamber is about evacuated. So we're about ready to go here. All right, air hose is disconnected. Now you can hear me better. So I can take this tube and connect it to my hard line. Just like that. And now I've got the go button, the valve here. As soon as I open that valve, it's just gonna start pulling transmission fluid out. Really quick too. That vacuum works great. Now we can look inside the container, and it's semi-transparent, it's kind of opaque, but you can see that level rising. Each one of these lines, I believe, is 2 quarts. This thing works very fast. You can see that it's starting to draw some air out of that transmission. Those lines are shaking pretty good. So that tells me that the transmission is just about empty. We'll let this go for a few more minutes, then I'll check the gauge and see how much we pulled out. That's about what I expected to pull out. Some of the fluid will still be left inside the pan. It won't get every drop out of it, but what it will do is allow me to remove that pan without spilling it all over the place. So as soon as we pull the pan out, you can see how much is left over. So as we come in under the cross member, there's the engine oil pan, bell housing, and just behind that, that's the transmission pan. That's what we're after, so let's grab those bolts. They're 10 millimeter. Zip those off and get that pan down. So if you're doing this without evacuating the pan first, leave some bolts up here in the front of the vehicle where it's lifted up. So all that fluid is going to be going back to the back of the pan. We're going to remove the bolts from the back of the pan, and that way that fluid can spill out that way. Sort of like this is a hinge door this way, and the hinge will be here. You'll just leave these bolts in loose, but you'll leave them in there to hold that up, and you can direct the fluid out the back. All right, from the back of the transmission now, you see this cross member that's right under that tail shaft. Well, that cross member is real close to that transmission pan. So I'm going to show you that I've got a 1/4 inch ratchet, an extension on a 10 millimeter, and it can get in between there and we can get that out. From that gap, that's where all your cascading transmission fluid would be coming out if you hadn't drained it from the top. But since we did, it's going to be a real clean job here. So that's that last bolt. Now I can feel the weight of a little bit of fluid left in that pan, and that's okay. All right, so the lip of the pan has hit the top of this cross member, so it's catching that for me. I'm going to go ahead and remove the 2 screws that are up in the front of the pan, and then we can just pull it this way and let it down. Okay, we're here at the bench, and you can see that that pan is tall enough to hold all of the fluid that was left over after we evacuated it. So I didn't spill a drop on the floor, which is awesome. The transmission is over here. It's still dripping into the catch pan. So let's take a look at this. That's the magnet. And that is all the junk that it collects, which is normal. That's why they put the magnet in there. So we're going to clean that off. And you can see that this transmission hasn't been serviced before. This plug comes to the Ford factory, installed into the transmission. When they install the transmission into the car, they put the dipstick down the tube, and this plug falls into the pan, and it just kind of floats around in there. That smudge is from my dirty finger touching it. So we're gonna pull this out and give it the first service. I've already poured out the fluid from the evacuator. That's in here. This will go to recycling. And the fluid from the pan can go into this container. We'll recycle that as well. Get rid of this gasket, and I'll clean off the magnet. In service information, Ford tells us that this gasket is reusable unless you find damage on it. So I'm going to clean this off, see if I can find any damage. If not, this is a good gasket. I'll go ahead and reuse it. It's actually better than the gasket that came with that filter. I like it better. This is a good sturdy gasket with a rubber liner impregnated into it, and the gasket that I got from the auto parts store is just a piece of rubber. This one is much better. I just make sure the pan is completely clean, the gasket is clean and dry, and the magnet is free of all that contamination. I'm about ready to put this on the car. It's gonna go back in its home right there at the bottom of the pan. Let's get this strainer off of here. It's probably gonna lose a little bit more fluid pulling this out. It's just held in with friction and a gasket. So the gasket has come off of this strainer and it's still inside of this well where the gasket goes. So I'm going to use a pick, pull that out of there. It's just a 90-degree pick. And I'm going to carefully go in there and pull this gasket out. And I don't want to scratch the sides of this bore. That would be bad. You don't want a leak in there. I don't know if you saw it. Just kind of flew out. Let me pick this out of the pan for you. There's that gasket. It's just a piece of rubber. The new strainer comes with this gasket already installed. All right, here's that brand new strainer. It's got a good gasket on there. You just push it up into this bore. And that's it. It just kind of hangs out there. One final wipe down of this mating surface. Make sure it's clean and dry so that we don't get any leaks after that pan gets back in there. That looks pretty good. So you've seen this before on my last transmission video, but my favorite transmission pan bolt installer tool is this ratcheting screwdriver from Matco. I'm going to use this extension here. It's a 1/4 inch. Put it there like that, and I can use my 10mm socket to get all those pan bolts on there. Now, Ford service information calls for 10 foot-pounds of torque on those pan bolts, and that's just about what I can give with my wrist using this ratcheting screwdriver. So I'll just ratchet them in there until it feels about right with my calibrated torque wrist, and we'll get that pan on there. All right, I've got my thumb holding one of the bolts in through the gasket that kind of holds it in place. I'm going to put my pan up over that cross member. Remember, it got stuck there when we pulled the pan off. And then carefully get it lined up with the holes, and I'm just going to put this bolt in finger tight. All right, I'm happy with that. Just wipe this pan down. We can go up to the top and fill this transmission up. And now we can add about 4.5 quarts of Mercon V. So we've got our initial fill of Mercon V in the transmission. It's time to start the car, let it get up to full operating temperature, and then we can get a reading on the dipstick to make sure everything's all right. I've let the car run for about 10 minutes, so now it's up to full operating temperature. It's time to check that dipstick to make sure we did a good job. When you're checking the fluid level, make sure the engine is running and the transmission is in park. It looks good. Let me show you. All right, you can see that oil level is right there in that crosshatch section. That's right where you want it. We're good to go. Well, this car is good to go. So until next time, thanks for watching. To see all my content when it's released, click over here. And click here to see another Tool Demos video. You know you want to.